Like I was saying, Rabbi Halpert is an attorney. He's the rabbi of Congregation Avat Shalom in Teaneck, which he mentions quite a bit in his book. He's also an attorney at Debevoise in Plimpton, where he serves as a tax counsel in the New York office and where he serves as a member of the investment management and private equity groups, as well as a member of the private fund transactions group. Somehow, wedged between all his responsibility, he manages to teach not one, but two classes at Sci Sims, business ethics and Jewish law. Our interviewer tonight, Max Landesman, is a celebrity in his own right as co-host of the Good for Shidduchim podcast. Questions will be addressed at the end of the talk, but feel free to enter them in the chat at any time. Welcome, Rabbi Halpert and Max Landesman.
Thank you, Shlomis, for that wonderful intro. And I guess being the rabbi of Abba Shalom, we naturally have to start at least 5 minutes late, correct? But being the recipient of smicha from YU, got your JD from Columbia Law School, I mean, Ivy League school, also practicing attorney here at a firm that I can't even pronounce. The fact that Peloton is literally like a few blocks away, naturally, without knowing you, you'd think you're like the biggest douche ever or whatever, but you're not like that. How do you stay grounded?
Okay, well, I mean, okay, you caught me a little off guard.
Sorry.
So no problem. So I mean, look, I think as with everything, it's important to constantly understand where you're coming from, what your goals and what your objectives are. So if you want to hope, if you work hard and hopefully you want to be successful at different ventures, different things that you're doing, you need to constantly understand and pair yourself with you need to constantly make sure to surround yourself with quality people who you look up to, people who are better than you in everything that they do. And I think that's something which I've tried to do very on a continuous basis. So both with respect to the law firm, when you're dealing with a lot of people who are a very high caliber, it puts you in your place on a regular basis. And when I'm in a shul like Congregation Abbas Shalom, congregants who are functioning at a high level does that as well.
Yeah. If you people who went to school with you in elementary school in 6th grade, if you're to just pick anyone and just ask them and say like, hey, with everything you were able to accomplish, you're a rabbi of a shul, you're also a practicing attorney, now an author. Would those students say like, yeah, we saw that coming naturally? Or was this really like, was this always on your agenda? Like why don't we go back a little bit about your background and tell us about how we even came to this moment to begin with?
So elementary school is a few years ago. So
yeah.
I'm not sure.
Only 4 or 5 years ago.
Yeah, only 4 or 5 years ago. I'm not sure if anyone had that in their, what exactly they were going to be doing. I mean, if you haven't like those yearbooks, where were you, what's this thing? Where will you be? Most likely to X, Y, Z.
Yeah.
So I don't think any of these activities are necessarily like so far off the map as to what I might have guessed or what people might have guessed. I think I've gotten very lucky and or had some good opportunities to be able to try to merge these different careers together. Because no matter how, sometimes as I say, it's better to be lucky than to be good. You have to be in the right place at the right time, and you have to be able to, to kind of make things happen. So I think I've gotten lucky in being able to merge these different worlds together.
I think this is where I was coming from. You're so humble. Like, I think this is a side where you're lucky and good at the same time, naturally. So that's why you got a Rabbi Halpert. But like, I think the biggest question, whenever you have, I feel like ever you have someone who is very successful in the, I would say, secular world, but also happens to be a Rav. Like, was there ever like a crossroads of thinking like, should I take one or the other? Like, was that ever a decision for you? Cool.
Yeah, I think there definitely were a few forks in the road where, and to be honest, the initial fork in the road that I took was to law school and was to pursue a career. And then, as with a lot of things in life, you make initial decisions, and then after a few years of pursuing something, you think back and you go, okay, was that necessarily the best decision wasn't necessarily best for myself, best for my family, how I wanted things to turn out. And then you also have to make decisions. Sometimes you have to take some risks, and you have to decide how much do I want this? How much am I willing to put on the line to pursue different things? So, there definitely were a few crossroads in life. There was a crossroad to go to law school. There was a crossroad to practice. Then Shoshana and I and the family, we went to Israel for a year, and that was a crossroad. And then we decided to come back, and that was a crossroad. And then, where you land professionally, taking the job at Abba Shalom, when it was first presented, that was a big crossroad, because I was very concerned about my ability to balance a legal career as well as functioning as the rabbi of the shul in a responsible capacity. So really, when, as I discuss in the book, there's a little chapter on the history of the Teaneck apartments and Congregation Abba Shalom. So there was a little bit of a two-way risk there. The shul took a risk on me, as I had not had prior pulpit experience. And I took a risk in terms, and I was very straightforward. I said, I'm not sure I'm going to have the time to do this. And initially, the relationship was more of a part-time relationship, and I was only in the shul every other week, then 2 out of 3 weeks, then 3 out of 4 weeks. And over time, as I realized I was going to be able to manage it, it kind of came from there. So yeah, there are always different choices you make in life, and there's, and you look back and you decide whether they were good choices or not.
Yeah, no, 100%. And knowing how many messages you ghosted me on, I know how busy life can get, for sure. Why don't we get into the book a little bit? Ultimately, what drove you to write this book?
That's a good question. So part of the book wrote itself, in the sense that after the first few months of COVID, looking back at my computer, I had these 3, 4, 5, 6 months worth of drushos that I had typed up and sent out to the shul as emails or WhatsApps. I was transcribing the drushos that I was giving via WhatsApp. So I had a lot of the content. And then once I was there, I said to myself, oh, there's a lot here, and this is a very interesting time. And then I had read a series of books, primarily by, blanking on his name at the moment, but primarily by one author who had gone into different sermons over the course of history, and Mark Saperstein, right? Professor Mark Saperstein, Rabbi Mark Saperstein, had taken different periods of history and looked at the sermons that were given during those periods of time and used them as a prism to view the historical time period. So I had seen those books. He had one on, he has Jewish preaching during times of war, where he looked at different sermons that were given during the Civil War, during the Revolutionary War, really going back very far. And then he had another book on the Holocaust, and another book. He was in the midst of putting together a book on 1948, the War of Independence for Israel. And I had seen how he had done that, and it was very interesting to me. And I thought that because COVID was such a significant historical event, and that very quickly we are going to lose perspective and lose memory of those events. And I think that actually has turned out to be very true within 2 or 3 years, whether on purpose or unintentionally. People have pushed the events and the timelines out of their mind. I just thought it was something that could be valuable to record how our community dealt with that. And I had a lot of the content, so it just kind of went from there.
Yeah, it was a question I actually wanted to ask you, where how do you think the experience of the pandemic has permanently changed the community, or is the Jewish community as a whole?
So the short answer to that is not as much as I would have thought, or you would have hoped. So a few months back, we did a panel on the tradition online, where it was a combination of both written essays as well as a podcast, where I interviewed 6 different individuals and asked them to submit essays from different perspectives in terms of what was the impact of COVID. So we had 2 presenters from the pulpit. We had 2 presenters who were principals in yeshiva high schools. We had 1 presenter who was a PhD, a school psychologist, and 1 presenter who was the executive director of an organization called Yesh Tikva out in LA. And their goal, their mission, was to think about how things had changed. And one consistent theme throughout those talks, and I recommend, little self-advertising here or self-plug for Tradition, I recommend people going online and checking out the Tradition online, the articles, and as well as the podcast. Their mission was to state and describe how things have changed. And really, one after the other, they really mentioned that a lot of things had not changed. Rabbi Rothwax, who is a rabbi of Congregation Beth Aaron in Teaneck, New Jersey, made the point of describing how during COVID, simchas and Jewish events like weddings, bar mitzvahs, and other types of events had contracted and become very focused on the individual, very focused on the content, the substance, and a lot of the other fluff that surrounds a lot of our simchas had gone away. And the hope was that COVID weddings would be a new normal, smaller weddings, more substantive weddings, more affordable weddings. And the reality is that very quickly we went back to the old norm, and that was perhaps an unfortunate opportunity that was missed. Some of the educators, Rabbi Josh Kahn, who's the principal of TABC, pointed out how COVID presented educators with a lot of challenges in terms of how to adapt and how to make the curriculum, how to make choices in a limited curriculum. There's a limited time, the day got shorter, people were in school less, and educators had to really think on their feet a little bit more. And that was arguably a good thing for the schools and for the educators, that they had to really reanalyze some of their thoughts. But once we got back into regular school, it's very easy to slip back into those same old patterns. And a lot of the creativity and excitement that was generated by different curriculums and different opportunities to interact, I don't know if all of that was held on. From my own perspective, I think that it's kind of crazy that you had such a world and life altering event, right? Literally the entire world was shut down. You could walk down, just a block.
I remember when driving into the city, it took me 17 minutes.
17 minutes.
Literally door to door.
You could take out a sandwich and have a picnic on 42nd and 5th.
Literally.
There was just no one here. Like those pictures of around the world of like all the main, Grand Central Station, empty, the tube in London, empty, and every aspect of our lives changed for several months. And now you look back and it's just like, everything's just back to normal. It just seems crazy. That doesn't mean that there haven't been impacts, subtle impacts. People's lives were impacted. There are parts of the economy changed, parts of how we do business changed. The fact that
we're on Zoom, I was just going to say
right here on Zoom, and there is a remote book talk of this nature that in and of itself changed. I mean, Shalamis, you're in the YU library. The YU library, aspects of the library have changed in terms of how people use the library. So I'm not saying that things haven't changed. It's just that, if you would have gone pre-World War II, post-World War II, you could point to 20 different things. Pre-9/11, post-9/11, substantive things have changed. Pre-COVID, post-COVID, I would have expected more change, and I haven't really seen it, certainly not within the Orthodox community.
Yeah.
And it's an interesting question. Is that I guess I end the book off with that question of, things have not changed that much. Is that a positive or a negative? Does it mean that our community was so strong and our infrastructure was so solid that we were able to take this very difficult blow and withstand it? Or does it show that we're just so stuck in our ways that even having the world literally shut down for 6 months, we just brush that off and be like, it's okay, no big deal.
So oftentimes you don't give your full opinion. So why don't I ask you, what do you think? Do you think that's a good thing? Do you think that's a bad thing? I know one thing, for at least shidduchim wise, is that people would get away with murder. Literally, they would pay for a wedding on somebody's lawn with basically a pizza and a cake, and that was called a wedding. Nowadays, we went back to spending God knows how much on weddings. So at least in that aspect, I kind of wish it was the other way, just to save a fortune. But what do you think in general?
I think it's unfortunate. I think there were a lot of opportunities missed. I think the inertia of life, how we, just life, regular life, and everyone wanting to get back to normal and just being used to your routine. There was a real opportunity to reevaluate many different things. And, it's oftentimes difficult to reset things like that. But take, tuition and school finances. There was an opportunity to really reimagine how our community spends money and how our community educates. Because for a whole year, the entire educational system was different, right? Everyone was doing remote, everyone was doing Zoom. And again, I'm not voicing an opinion whether that was good, bad, but I don't think a deep analysis and change to how we educate really took place. So we mentioned the simchas. Did we really think from a communal perspective? Or even during COVID, there was a coming together of the community in a certain way, which I think obviously people were on one hand very separate, but within the groups, people created very strong relationships, and communities became very, very important because lots of other communities had fallen away. You weren't going to the office, you weren't going to work, you weren't going to all these things. So the communities, those block minyanim that you had, or those relationships that you had that were within your pod or within your group or whatever it was, became very, very strong. And with, with the end of COVID and everyone kind of going back to their old routine, did the community, I don't think our communities kept that up. So like the chesed that took place during COVID within the community, I think was unprecedented. Oh, sorry, I hate to use that word, was very intense. Right. And it really, there was a bond there where people were really looking out for each other. People were really making sure others were doing okay. And I think that fell away a little. I think that's unfortunate.
Like, do you feel like I just reading through the book, for example, there was a lady, you obviously changed all the names. You wouldn't put someone's actual name in there, but there was I believe an elderly woman who lost her husband. And then you sent out a WhatsApp saying like, hey, if you can give her a call, it would be great. She'd really appreciate it. And that people would actually call her during that time versus now, if you just send out a random chesed opportunity, do you feel like people are ignoring it more now because it's not COVID?
I think it is harder to get people to focus on chesed for two reasons. One, the reality was that there was not that much else going on. So now a lot of people mean well, but there are many things that take up time in people's lives, and there are activities and there are events, and they're not around. So one thing during COVID that perpetuated additional chesed was that people had time on their hands. The second thing is that I think during COVID, there was a very strong sense of, if you don't do this, this will not get done. Like, we don't have 100 people who can do this. There's no one else, you're the only person in that pod who can take care of this because no one else is going to interact. So there was this sense where people asked you to say, can you do this for someone within your community, within your group? There was a sense like, if I don't do it, no one's going to do it. So people really stepped up. And now we've gone back to, which is a good thing, that our community is so large and we have so many individuals and so many people. And the thought is, okay, someone else will do it. I'll try, but I know there'll be somebody else there for me. And I think during COVID, there really wasn't, there wasn't that feeling. So I think that went away.
Yeah. And I would say you have a very special gift. I would say that even when something very, very controversial comes up, which has happened in our shul, you're able to kind of deal with it. Any topic, especially at Shalashus, you're able to kind of give both sides to it. But just going back and just reading through your book, and just like at the start of every chapter was like, and 6 people from this shul died, and 12 people from this shul. It brought me back to where I literally thought it was doomsday, like we're never going to get back to a certain level. And over here, you actually wrote a very, very straightforward, all caps, very like, this is my stance on something, which is very, very unlike you to do. For example, it was talking about, warning about traveling over Pesach during COVID. Do you remember this? Or that it was absolutely straight up Chil Hashem in the highest level. It's very unlike you to do that. Maybe you can take us through like those times about being a communal leader, writing something like writing stuff like that.
Sure. So
it's probably not easy.
Before I respond to that question, I'm just going to clarify one point, which is you are correct that in the first few chapters, the book is very heavy in terms of COVID, what was going on, and as part of the note that I had sent to the community where I was trying to drive home a point that people should not be traveling. There is a reference as to how many Shiva notices that some of the congregations in Teaneck had sent out. But I do want to clarify, and actually I got a compliment, which was a very, a little bit backhanded compliment, where somebody said to me, I was reading the beginning of the book and I actually felt like I was back in.
That's how I felt.
And that was, it was a nice compliment in the sense that they were telling me that I had written that section well, but then they're like, yeah, and then I had to close the book. So I just want to give people there is light at the end of the tunnel. If you get past the first, kind of once you get into June, July, and the book goes from March, from the week before the lockdown for one full year. Once you get into June, May or June, etc., it really, the tone of the book becomes much lighter because, of course, generally like things had opened up, etc. So if you're worried about, oh, why would I read a book that's so depressing? You can just skip the first few chapters and then it opens up significantly. Or, if you just want to get back into that point. To your question in terms of taking such a strong stand, and just to give the context, so this was right before Pesach, and several, there had been announcements and proclamations, and the RCBC had written a letter. RCBC is Rabbinic Council of Bergen County, had written a letter saying that people should not travel, and that letter was consistent with the OU and with other letters as well. And actually, it's the letter, the actual letters, the documents are in the Sefer itself. So the Sefer serves as a primary source from a historical perspective, that it has a lot of these letters. So the letter said, don't travel. And then during the course of that week, I was getting texts and emails from people saying, hey, so-and-so is traveling. Ruvain is going. Shimon is going. Should I go? Can I go? And then I actually got questions from people where they said their parents want them to come and celebrate the Seder with them in Manhattan, with them in Florida, with them in Muncie, with them in wherever. Am I allowed to go? And it really, one thing which I think Bergen County stood out a little, we're not the only community, but Bergen County stood out a little in the sense that there was a great consistency amongst the Rabbinical Council of Bergen County, and people were very much on the same page, and we had many meetings and phone calls and letters and emails and texts and everything. But once the final decision of the community was made, everyone pretty much held the line for the first June, July, maybe into August already. And then once COVID became politicized, then it went all over the place. But at least at the beginning, there was this strong sense of what was wrong and what was right. And the idea of the whole country being locked down, people literally losing their jobs, people getting sick, people dying, and people standing up and saying, well, it's Pesach, I need to go to Florida. It just was, from my perspective, beyond the pale. And on top of that, there was, if someone wants to endanger themselves, technically that's usher, that's prohibited, but I can't stop you from doing that. But it's one thing if you go away and then you come back. Like if I'm living in my own house and I go away and I come back, so the only people who are impacted by that are the people in my house. But you have people who are living in apartments, who are living in a tight-knit area where you're sharing a common staircase, you're sharing a common area. So you want to go to Florida, okay, I think it's wrong, but don't do it. But then you're going to come back into this apartment where there were people who were pregnant, there were people who were high risk. What gives you the right to come back? And that was one of the lines that I said in the note, where I said, you cannot go, but if you do go, you cannot come back, because you have no right to come back and endanger other people. So, and I think that was a message which was consistent from the RCBC, which was a consistent message that I was hearing from my Rebbeim, and which I truly felt was correct. Also, the Chillul Hashem aspect, again, going back to this Florida idea, like Pesach is a very important holiday, and celebrating Yom Tov with your family is very important, and the Seder is very important. It is arguably one of the most significant nights of the year. But how do you explain to somebody who's not Jewish, who's literally lost everything and being told that they need to not leave, that they need to lock down, but because you don't want to not be able to steal the Afikomen with your grandfather, you're going down to Florida. Like it does not translate. And that's, forget the, again, you have to also put yourself back in March or April. So like come May, June, July, August, you already have different states acting differently. In Florida, there was no COVID, or in different states, there were people who were, taking different positions. I'm not opining who was right, who was wrong. I mean, it'll probably take another 5-10 years before we figure out who really was. But in March and April, everybody was saying, you are putting people at risk. We haven't flattened the curve. I should remember that language. Got to flatten the curve, right? The curve was not flat at that point. Emergency rooms were full. Hospitals were overflowing, and people were people were asking me, can I go to Florida? And the answer was no, no, you can't.
And as a fellow Floridian who was living in Florida at the time, we thank you for having them not being sent down and bringing COVID to Florida. But so that we certainly appreciate. If you were to think of the most important thing that you learned being a spiritual leader in the times of a crisis, what do you think that would be?
That's a great question.
I only asked good question. At least I
Never
tried.
know. It was a great question.
Oh,
The other
great
questions
question.
were good. This one was great.
Yeah.
I think it is interesting how much people are seeking spiritual guidance. We don't always, I'd say, within our community, although within our community where religion is taken very seriously and influences every part of our lives, a lot of people don't wear their spirituality on their sleeves. Even if during davening they're shuckling like crazy and they're wearing a hat or a guard, whatever, as soon as they walk out of shul, a lot of the external spirituality kind of falls away because, walking around the law firm or accounting firm or the subway, not really want to where you want to wear your spirituality on your sleeve. But in a crisis, I think when a crisis arises, you see that people are really craving spiritual connection and spiritual guidance. And it's a little humbling to have people kind of seeking that out and trying to provide that. And also there is this sense, and I understand why Hasidus is so popular in a time of crisis, where you can turn to somebody and just ask them the question, and then just the Rebbe said to do X, Y, Z. And people ask you questions, and sometimes like you really just want to say like, that's not a question I know the answer to. Like, I can talk to you, we can work it through, we can look for solutions, but I can't answer that question for you. And they're like, no, but just tell me what you think. like it's kind of like this. In a time of crisis, people are looking for guidance, and it's humbling and a big responsibility to play even a part of that role. And this was a crisis that we, again, once you got past the initial stages, there was an inconvenience. It was difficult. There was a financial aspect, but most, in terms of historic crises, that it was not that.
Yeah, I literally thought like it was like doomsday, like it would never come back. Like I don't even know what that would look like, and I kind of feel like we have gotten fully. But I don't know. I feel like, but like reading through some of your book, you really do actually bring us back to that moment. But were you ever surprised by how someone responded to a particular drasha for that week? Because I know you were giving out those drushas. Was there ever any specific where a bunch of people reach out to you over that specific drasha or anything like that?
So I can't recall a period or an incident where multiple people responded, but it is always fascinating, the post-game show around any drasha, the post-game analysis, because people will come over to you and make comments that sometimes are so incredibly surprising. First of all, sometimes they'll say, I can't believe, well, that was so interesting that you said X. And you're sitting there going, I don't think I said X. Right? Like this was actually pre-COVID. I was giving a drasha about something about immigration. I don't remember. And the individual came over to me and started yelling and screaming at me. How could I have been so pro-immigration? He actually, of course, was from Florida. So he live in Florida. If you saw people coming up from Florida, the danger, da, 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 da. And my only response was like, I said, I didn't voice an opinion whether I was pro-immigration or anti-immigration. Like, I don't know why you're yelling at me. It's like, that's always interesting. It's like, what you say is not always what people hear. Or sometimes what you think you said, maybe you said it, or maybe you didn't mean it, but it came across that way. So that's always interesting. People come over to you afterwards. And then what I find particularly rewarding is when somebody says, oh, you said, you discussed this, and that really triggered something, and I made me think about something else, maybe think about something similar, or maybe reconsider something. So that's always rewarding. But is there a particular incident or particular, I mean, I did definitely get some pushback on some of the drushas that were describing my frustration that people were starting to do like breakaway minyanim, or kind of getting back together, and I was opposed to that, consistent with what the RCBC had come out, and people were pushing back and saying, no, the RCBC is being too conservative. The RCBC is, you're kowtowing to the government, and then, we have the right to get together, and it's, etc. So like there was response like that. But otherwise, yeah, I can't really think of it's also a few years ago now, but I can't really think of a particular incident.
if a future generation were to read your book, Speaking to an Empty Shul, by the way, when the name came out, I initially thought, I'm like, first of all, it's incredible that you came out with a sefer, at all. It's amazing that you even had the time to write a sefer. But my immediate thought was like, how did he write a full book talking about the 30-minute drasha halacha shir before davening that no one speaks, that no one comes to? That was my initial thought. I'm like, dang. I'm just messing.
The attendance has gone up 300-fold last week.
And Shala Shudas.
Shala Shudas is booming.
And if you're ever in Teaneck, please come to Shala Shudas, where we solve the world's problems. Correct?
Absolutely. All of the world's problems are solved in Mitrim Mincha Ma'ariv on Shabbos at Congregation Ahavat Shalom.
Exactly. But if a future generation were to read your book, what message would you want them to understand about the moment in history?
So if 100 years from now, someone reads the book, reads the Sefer, what message should they take away from the Sefer? I think one message which would come away from the Sefer is that the values, the midot, the Torah guidance that we hold so dear really is applicable in every situation, in every generation. And here, like, no one in a million years is thinking of a COVID type event, but yet through the Sefer, you see that there are so many Torah ideas that are relevant and that are timely to address these issues. And that's, it's time those ideas are universal, they're infinite, and furthermore, that no matter what's going on in your life, or in history, that's the proper way to view the issue. And that's the proper way to be thinking about the issue with these Torah ideals. Not that, okay, we have this whole bookshelf over here, but then when the rubber hits the road and it's time to make a decision, like, we just kind of push that aside. So if that message came across, I would be very happy. If anyone was reading the book in 100 years from now, I'd be even happier. I don't know, like,
it's gonna be the #1 Amazon bestseller by then.
So at that point, no one will be reading books. You'll just download it directly into your.
The fact that I have your autograph, I can die in peace. I can die in peace. That literally bucket list moment right there.
I was gonna say I would increase the length of your bucket list right there.
Yeah. What was the thing that you're, looking back, this is kind of like a two-pronged question of going through this time period. What was the thing that you were most proud of, and do you have any regrets during that time period?
Most proud of in terms of how the shul and how we handled the time period. I think the thing I'm most proud of, and I would give a shout out to Moshe Shasemsky, who was the president at the time, is simply the fact that we were able to stay open and continue to function as a community. Now, that might sound a little odd, but if you understand, so Congregation Ahavat Shalom by definition is a quote unquote Shabbos only shul. During the week, people go their different ways. We meet at TABC, which is the high school. You can't really have a minyan there on a Monday or Tuesday morning because the high school is there. You can't have outsiders. So it's a Shabbos only shul. So when COVID hit, it would have been very, quote unquote, easy or natural to say, listen, there are other full service, full functioning shuls in the community, and go align yourself or connect yourself with one of those. Our community kind of can't handle this. And we did not do that. And the other thing also is that with, as I mentioned, we didn't have our own building. So everyone will remember all the discussions and debates and issues that were brought up in every single building as to how to handle this issue. Are we gonna, how far is the social distancing? Can kids come? Can kids not come?
How to deal with gas leaks.
How to deal with gas leaks.
My first week as president.
President, yes.
Wow.
Shout out to Max.
I'm
also a former president of Congregation Ahavat Shalom.
I don't like telling people, but I can't even, just dealing with that alone, I can't even imagine being the rabbi of the shul.
Okay, wow. There were, and again, with no tightness, no complaints against TABC. TABC was functioning as a high school and trying very hard to remain open and limit the shutdowns and the second wave and the third wave. And it took a lot of negotiation and a lot of conversations between us and the high school. And I credit also Ozzy Mandel, who was the president of TABC at the time, who really worked very hard to allow the shul to stay open and figure out a way. You know, we had an extra cleaning crew that would come in after Shabbos and fumigate everything. If you remember early in COVID, everyone was spraying everything, and like different things were done. But the mere fact, you know, what do they say? Like, you know, showing up is 90% of the battle.
Yeah,
or something like that. The mere fact that the shul remained open and continued to function throughout COVID, and when the outdoor minyanim started, we had outdoor minyanim. Actually, we had more minyanim during COVID than any other time because we were having daily outdoor minyanim. Without COVID, we never had daily minyanim. During COVID, daily minyanim, we were having minyanim 7 days a week. And then when when you were allowed to go back inside, we went back inside, and we had all the different, you know, all the different rules. And then we had a tent for Yom Kippur. So I think that's the thing I'm actually most proud of, and that the community came together and the shul was able to remain open and function and service the community in a real way throughout the pandemic.
Yeah. This is gonna sound a little weird, but I
Weirder than anything else we've talked about.
seriously, but like because of COVID is why I actually moved to Teaneck. I don't think because if COVID never happened, I don't know if I actually would have ever moved to Teaneck. But
all the things
I don't know.
all the things I regret about COVID, I have to add this one also.
100%.
Darn COVID, otherwise
COVID. You almost got me downstairs. But yeah, just wanted to end off. Do you plan to write a follow-up or a companion volume, perhaps about the post-pandemic chapter of your community, or any thoughts on that, or is this?
So actually, I'm gonna answer the first question, which you didn't ask. Your comment was because of COVID, I moved to Teaneck. One, we talked about whether COVID had any impact on changes. I actually think that the Teaneck apartment community has changed significantly post-COVID because, and it'll be interesting to see whether this is a long-term change or just a blip. But during COVID, everybody left Manhattan. Everybody left the city.
Oh, for sure.
So if you a lot of people left the city and bought houses or rented houses. The prices of houses became astronomical, and a lot of people were, you know, maybe a house wasn't the answer for them. You had many people who moved from the Upper West Side, from the Upper East Side, who moved to the Teaneck apartments, who just never really considered the Teaneck apartments. Like if you have a Manhattan Upper West Side mentality, and someone said to you, "Why don't you move to Teaneck?" They would like let you get laughed out of the building. But post COVID, a lot of people moved out of the city and to Teaneck, and that, you know, I think that trend has continued. That there are people who view. It used to be like Washington Heights and Riverdale were a natural feeder or into the Teaneck apartments, and now it's expanded to the Upper West Side and other areas. So I think the community, and that's had all sorts of interesting ramifications on the community. Not good, not bad, just different, just changes. And it's changed. It's also made the community more heterogeneous. That you have a much more diverse population now. Because of that. So the question, you know, as the city, real estate in the city returns, the Upper West Side returns. I don't know, you know, people have different views on how the city actually looks nowadays, but it'll be interesting to see whether that remains true or not. So the same way you came from Florida to Teaneck.
I was thinking about even going to the Upper West Side, but because of what was going on, I naturally went to Teaneck, and thank God I did. Thank God I did, because I don't like the Upper West Side too much.
When you talk about, like, you know, different forks in the road and roads not taken, imagine Max Landisman on the
Upper West Side, yeah. Well, I probably would have gone there.
Would that have been good for Shidduchim or bad for Shidduchim?
Going to the Upper West Side is terrible for Shidduchim. It's terrible for Shidduchim.
Okay, you heard it. You heard it here first, people.
Yeah, coming to Teaneck is very good for Shidduchim.
Very good for Shidduchim.
But
in terms of writing another sefer, so Moshe Lichtenstein was very, very kind to me and wrote a few sentences. And in the end of his Michtav Bracha, he says, let me just find it. He makes a very nice comment, and he says, to find it, says, "May HaKadosh Baruch Hu grant us Samchenu Kimos Ninsanu." May the author have the privilege to write an additional volume chronicling drushos of joy and happiness.
Amen.
So, you know, that would be. I don't know if I see myself writing another sefer of this type on drushos and Divrei Torah.
You can do this again.
I would. I would like to write another sefer. I do have some other ideas that I'm thinking about, but I'd like to write something in Hebrew.
Oh, very nice.
Because
Because you don't want me to read.
at the end of the day, you can go back throughout history, and if you write in Hebrew, and Shalamis will attest to this in the library, for thousands of years, or if 100 years from now you want someone to be able to read your book, if it's in Hebrew, it'll always be read. Like, if you go back, even Rav Hirsch, so he wrote in German, and it took tremendous efforts to get that translated into English and then translated into Hebrew. And, so most of the time when you write in a language that's not Hebrew, it will speak to that generation, but then it's going to be gone. So I would like to try to write something in Hebrew. But, again, that's a big, having seen what a project, having seen
Yeah.
what a project it is, and it's two projects. One is to write the Sefer, and then is to go through the publishing process and the editing process, and then debating and discussing and fighting with your editor what goes in and what doesn't go in and what should, that whole process. So there's a whole second component to writing to publishing a book, which I'm not excited about, but I would like to actually do the content and do the actual writing, and then maybe I could farm out the publishing to someone else.
Okay. Well, you went through the hard time, the hard stuff. Now the next time it's just gonna be a walk in the park.
Oh, yeah.
But
Perhaps.
anyways, thank you, Rabbi Halpert, for tolerating my questions, and
Thank you for taking the time to prepare. Interesting, insightful questions. People warned me I should be on my toes if I was going to have you as the moderator, but
yeah,
you did not.
the joke was you must have asked 100 people. You probably ran out of people to ask, but I appreciate you asking me.
It's between you and a chatbot.
Yeah, literally.
But it's the choice.
Rabbi, if you tell me to jump off a building, I'll say how high. Ask me to do anything, I'll, no problem. But no, this is great. It's definitely,
that.
yeah.
Shalom, Shuri, I have not been keeping track. I don't know if there have been
45
questions that have been chatted in, but do we want to open up the floor to questions? Do people want to
Yes,
hear us?
I'd like to do that. People, if you have questions, please put it in the chat. I know I have a question. I read most of your book, and I noticed that at the beginning of every chapter, you talk about what was going on in the world at the time.
Right.
So I found that very interesting. It puts things in context. I saw Jeffrey Gurov wrote, he's a historian, and he wrote a probation about that. I was wondering, did you write those factoids about what was going on as you went along, or did you write it for the book? Did you backtrack?
So that's a great question. So actually, I did backtrack. I mentioned the other Sfarim and the other works out there that discuss sermons. And what you often find when you're reading these sermons is that you struggle, or you're a little bit of a detective reading the sermon, reading the drasha, and then trying to figure out, why did the rabbi say X? What was he hinting at? What was going on? Sometimes with a lot of detective work and a lot of historical knowledge, you can place it into context and figure it out. And sometimes it's left as a mystery for history in terms of what was going on and what was really driving the rabbi to speak on that topic. If you see a drasha about talking in shul, was it because shul was very loud that week, or was it because that rabbi got a letter from some other shul in some other community and he decided that this was something to speak to? So I felt that by putting the historical perspective in the Sefer, it would make it very clear what was going on that week and what was the cause, what was the driver of the drasha. Not every week, but almost every drasha, if you read that paragraph in front, you can see how that linked. So for example, one of the weeks, it was the first week that we had quote unquote reopened a little, and we were now having outdoor minyanim. So that was the historical piece. And then the drasha was about how people, the impact of returning to shul and returning to minyan for the first time. And a lot of people expressed, this actually was a reaction that I got from people. A lot of people expressed how they went to that minyan the first time for 3 or 4 months. These are people who daven with the minyan 3 times a week for 20 years. And they went back to that minyan. They were expecting it to be this incredible religious experience, and it wasn't. And the question was, why? And should we be, how should we react to that? So, but only because you saw the historical content. I mean, the drasha stands on its own. It was, the drasha has the Torah content there and it has the takeaway, but it's only because of the historical context that you knew what was going on. Now you understood why I wrote that. The other thing that the way I pulled together the historical tidbits, so certainly in the last few years and post October 7th, we've been very, very sensitive to this. There's a lot of discussion in terms of curating content and not necessarily either censoring or fake news, or what you choose to discuss and what you choose to report on is a censoring decision in and of itself. So, if two events take place on the same day and you choose to only put one of them on the front page, that in and of itself is a censoring decision. You didn't technically censor anything, but by not discussing the first topic, you on some level have censored it. So I was a little hesitant in these historical blurbs to, how was I going to figure out what was historically relevant? And I was drawing from a few different sources, but one thing that I did do is there's a website called Win Calendar, and basically what it does is it tells you every day of the year, going back to X number of years, what was the most popular tweet that day, what was the most popular item which was searched on Google, what was the most popular article, etc. So by looking at that and pulling some stuff off of that, I felt that I was giving a more rounded perspective. At the same time, obviously, there was an implicit bias there that it was what I had seen, what was relevant to me based on my experiences living in Bergen County, New Jersey, and, speaking to this shul. So there was some censorship, or I don't know, censorship is not the right word, but there was some curation bias on my part, but I did try very hard to get other perspectives. I also, before I published the book, I gave the manuscript to actually somebody who works in this firm who is definitely more left-leaning than I am politically. And I asked them to go through all of the historical points and ask them, do you feel like I've skewed one way or the other? Are there things that, are there other events that you think that I should have put in? Like, I just saw it, so I mentioned it. There was something about Nancy Pelosi getting caught on camera getting her hair done or something during the lockdown, and that was like a big brouhaha at the time. So is the fact that was there a Republican who also had a similar event like that? Probably yes. I'm sure. I just, for some reason, either that didn't register or wasn't as popular a hit on the internet, so it didn't go in. I wouldn't want someone who's a Democrat or left or more kind of left of me politically to not read the book or not be willing to engage with the book because they felt that my historical blurbs were kind of one-sided. So I did try to get multiple perspectives on the historical content of the drushas.
Okay, there are a couple more questions here. Can you see them?
I saw them pop up on the screen, but then they disappeared. So if you could read me one, and I'll try to see if I can figure out how to get them.
In writing this book, what anecdote or connection to Torah excited you the most as you were writing about it?
And maybe the person who put the question in can clarify. When you say what anecdote, you mean what drasha or what part of the book was I most excited about, or I thought was most interesting or most creative, or what event during that course of that year animated me most significantly?
I think it's both.
I think it's both. Okay. Well, I hope this answers the question. If not, please respond. But I would say, I think the period of time which is discussed in the book, which is, again, a lot of times we forget that COVID year was very long. That was the end of the presidential election between President Biden and President Trump in the first election. And then you had all of the political drama around that. And then you had the actual election results, which election day was Tuesday, but it wasn't until Friday night that people actually that a winner was called. So like on Shabbos, you found out who the president was, which made some people very happy and then some people very upset. And then you had the kind of the post-presidency where you had the Stop the Steal, ultimately culminating in January 6th. And I think those events and the drushas that discuss those events, which have nothing to do with COVID at all, except that it was the year of COVID. I found that time period very, very compelling and very interesting from as a Orthodox Jew living in a democratic society and struggling with all of the noise that was going on around there, and also struggling how within our own community we were facing a lot of those rifts where Republicans and Democrats were just not able to talk to each other and were talking past each other, and you had all of this anger and how that was impacting and filtering into our community. And so on one hand, you'd say, well, we would it impact our community the same way as the general community, and it really was. So I think some of the drushas and some of the divrei Torah around that were very compelling. And then ultimately, the January 6th drasha. So there was I was a little bit disappointed. So there are a bunch of color pictures in the Sefer. But one drasha was based off of a picture which was taken of a congressman cleaning on his hands and knees, cleaning up the rotunda of the Capitol post the January 6th riot or protest or rebellion or whatever you want to call it. Different people have different descriptions for it. And that picture was very compelling, and that picture was the driver of the drasha. But I wanted to include that picture, and it would have cost me thousands of dollars in copyright. So instead, I just put a link to the picture. And actually, throughout the book, there are many QR codes that you can scan, which will take you to the website. The book has a website, and will take you to the website. And on the website, either there are pictures or there are links which were otherwise copyrighted that I couldn't put in the book. And also there are the original voice notes that I sent out to the community. So that was a very compelling photo, and it gets reflected in the book as well. So I'm not sure if that answers your question, but I hope it does.
Here's another question. You mentioned the Teaneck apartments. In the past, most couples would stay 3 to 4 years before buying a house. But since COVID and the rise in housing prices, many are staying longer term, maybe even 6 to 10 years, or even 10 years. How has the shift affected the dynamics of the shul, with people now tending to stay longer?
So I tell people, if you're interested in investing in real estate and you're looking for different market indicators, the Teaneck Apartments is a good leading indicator for the real estate market, because depending on how if there's a tight real estate market, then people would stay closer to 5 or 6 years. And if the market, if interest rates were low or prices had dropped, which happens once every century or so, then people would stay shorter. You are correct that people are staying in the Teaneck Apartments longer. Part of that is a little bit of a COVID blip, I think, and part of it is right now the inventory in Bergen County of houses has gone down significantly, and interest rates have gone up. The demographic of the shul has shifted. I would say that while a few years ago the demographic was really 22 to 26, the demographic now is closer to maybe 30, 35. You definitely are couples that are staying longer, and couples that are quote unquote older, if you can call someone who's 28 older, but couples who are older than what used to be in the Teaneck Apartments who are staying. And I think it's also indicative, we have groups in the shul, and in the past, the groups would always be maybe a 1-year-old or a 2-year-old, maybe like a 3-year-old was the senior citizen of the groups. And now the groups are filled with kids who are 4, 5, 6, even 6 or 7 years old, which is indicative of the fact that people are staying in the Teaneck Apartments longer, or alternatively, people are moving into the Teaneck Apartments with a child or with 2 children who are a little older, which did not used to be the case. So the demographic of the Teaneck Apartments is shifting. I happen to think that that's a positive thing for the community, because while there is something, I'd say, nice and comfortable of walking into a shul that everybody is this homogeneous group and is all exactly the same age and the same person and the same type, it's not really a healthy community. A healthy community has a full healthy is too strong a word, but it's not the ideal community. The ideal community has a full demographic range, ranging from young children to senior citizens and everything in between. And it's good for the community. It's good for people to interact with people of different ages and to interact and understand that there are lots of other aspects of life and to see how other people live those lives. I mean, I don't think it's a concern or an issue because it's not like the people who moved into the Tinnik apartments were moving from a cave. They had been in other shuls. They had seen how the world works. But, is it so great to be 3 or 4 years just with lots of other couples? I think that is not great. So right now the demographic is much more, first of all, it's not only couples, there's a large singles community in the Tinnik apartments as well. There's also 2 new buildings went up in the Tinnik apartments, and there are a lot of folks who are downsizing from their houses and moving into the Tinnik apartments. And there's, the demographic has gotten significantly larger. Just to be clear, I'm not working on commission. I don't, I'm not pushing, or I don't get any benefit from people moving in. So I'm not pushing, but people should know that the Tinnik apartment community is much broader than it was pre-COVID. I guess that's another thing that changed as a result of COVID.
Right.
Did you find that your role shifted to a sort of pastoral counseling, helping people find resources, helping them find parnassa?
That's a great question. I think without a doubt, there was more pastoral counseling or interactions during COVID. And I would say kind of the range of activities that I was involved in was definitely broader. When I started at Congregation Ahavat Shalom in the Tinnik apartments, it was very clear that I did not have, unlike a full-time rabbi or even a part-time rabbi, I did not have the time to do pastoral counseling or be involved in other communal events. I think during COVID, because as I mentioned, there was just less going on. I probably had a little bit more time, and there was many more communal issues that were taking place and need to be addressed. So I think my role did change a little. I think it has shifted back to what it was before, where, maybe not. I don't know. I have to go back and look at all my texts and see how many of them are kashrus questions versus how many of them are, can you help me find a job questions?
Is the chicken kosher?
Exactly. So I see a dear congregant, currently one of our Gabanim, just threw a question into the chat asking me if during the course of writing the book, it led to any new relationships. And the answer to that is definitely yes. One of the unintended consequences, but a very positive consequence, I think, of publishing a sefer is you end up interacting with all sorts of people who you would not have thought of. Sometimes you're chasing down a footnote, or you're chasing down a source, and you end up emailing one person who sends you to another person, who sends you to another person, and you make all sorts of interesting relationships, and you get into contact with all sorts of people. As part of the publishing process, just meeting people in the publishing world and in the book world, I've met a bunch of people, and that's been very interesting. As part of the post-publishing process, I've gotten very interesting emails from folks who have seen the book or have come across it, or I've done a few different podcasts and a few different lectures and shiurim, and it definitely puts you in touch with different people. So that is actually, I think, one of the almost the best parts of this whole process has been meeting and interacting with a whole host of different people, ranging across the gamut, across the religious gamut, across across the entire spectrum of people, either academics or rabbis, a few politicians. I've actually been in touch with a few non-Jewish spiritual leaders who, in terms of the conversations of how their communities and their religion and their religions dealt with a lot of the issues, and kind of comparing and contrasting, which has been very interesting. You asked if I was going to publish another book. I played with the idea, and I guess this might still be possible, of reaching out to a Muslim imam and a Christian pastor and doing a joint book, kind of comparing and contrasting, the different speeches and sermons and interactions that the different religions had, and kind of going through the year, because, a lot of the struggles that we struggled with, other faith-based communities struggled with as well. If just like the shul was locked down, the mosque was locked down and the church was locked down. So how did they deal with the inability to have communal prayer? And I thought that might be a very fascinating idea. None of the Jewish publishing houses that I spoke to they all said, that sounds fascinating. We would never publish that. So I would have to go to a kind of a secular publishing house, or like a HarperCollins or an academic press. So
There we go.
that would be a huge undertaking. But that, again, I did get in touch with some people in those worlds who I never would have spoken with otherwise. So
I thought we are gonna go meet with them right after this.
yeah, right after that, we're going over there.
Exactly.
Okay, so we're out of time, but thank you so much. This was a very interesting conversation. And is there anything else you want to close with?
I'll just close with, first of all, thank you so much. Thank you to the YU Library and to Yeshiva University generally for facilitating this and for allowing us to have this conversation. I would mention as well that the librarians at the YU Library also were very helpful during the course of writing the Sefer. I had a few questions on particular Yiddish phrases that I reached out to some of your colleagues, and also in terms of getting some sources. So the YU Library is a tremendous resource, both for students, but even for alumni and really for the Jewish community in general. So I highly encourage folks to get to know the YU Library. But Shalom, thank you so much for reaching out. And look, I really think, I believe deeply that the year of COVID was a watershed moment, and continues to resonate. And I hope that this Sefer and this book is used as a resource for people to think about those ideas and to continue thinking and discussing and conversing over those issues. If you don't yet own a copy, please feel free to hit the website or reach out to me. My number and email are all there, and I'd be more than happy to connect you with a copy of the Sefer. And thank you very much to Max for putting in the effort and the time and preparation to lead this very interesting conversation.
Couldn't have said yes fast enough.
You did say yes very quickly. I actually.
Yes.
Okay, thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Have a good night.
Good.
Good night.